So there are just a few grammar topics that I wanted to discuss, including how clitics or deixis is used in the text. And I also want to come back to the topic of the relational nouns, because it's not a very straightforward theme. And this itach is a great example when it's not entirely clear how it is used. Whether in this particular narrative, the story is about accompanying and then arriving, or arriving and. These double verbs are productive in Chola languages, and they seem to carry additional meaning. So I would translate it as, and he arrived. Along with that, he arrived at Hushwintik. You may remember that text as well. Here the king dresses up for the ball game up front, ordered by 4 successive kings. And then the text goes, Yita Pitzach. And then that you can translate it as he accompanied them as a ball player, where Pitzach is an agentive noun. He of the ball game, Pitz ball game, Pitzach agentive noun. But you can also think of it as a verb, perhaps, like an intransitive, Pitzach or Pitzich. So in this case, Yita Pitzich would be, and along with that, he played ball with them, presumably. So same as Yita Huli. So that's that part. I prefer accompanying them as a ball player. It has a better ring to it, but it's not clear what the author of this text actually wanted to say. There is a stranger compound verb. A colleague of mine, Christian Prager, wrote a note on it, and it kind of stopped at that point. You can kind of see why. So this is a narrative about how someone was captured. And this is the captured lord of Hishwitz. And the verb is described as tzak huli. Tzak huli. Tzak means to seize. It's a transitive verb, as in conjure when you conjure gods. And huli is to arrive. So the captive sees arrived, like he was captured and arrived. Well, so far so good. The problem is that the second example of the same verb occurs on an elder from Quirigua. And there, it's same tzak, like conjure, and then huli, but the protagonist is not a captive. It's a king of Copan who arrives at Quirigua, presumably to rebuild the city after a flood. As you kind of wonder, okay, so in one case it's a captive arriving, in another case it's the king arriving to rebuild. Obviously, this is not a king who was captured, as far as we know, at least. And there are no more examples of this double verb, so we don't know what it actually means. Obviously, it's not referring to captives, or I mean, if it is referring to captives, it's not about being captured. Something else. Maybe same idea, like along with something, in the sense that as in seize, as in take together. With that, he arrived. But still unclear what they want to say here. And that's just an example of the problem that we have with Maya text. We have so few contexts, so few actual variations, that when they want to go poetic, when they want to say a little more than just the bare bones of the rhetoric, it gets harder for us because we don't have something to build on. Unfortunately, this particular expression does not occur in present-day Mayan languages or in colonial period texts. So we have nothing to compare it to directly. But we do have examples of something similar. We know it's a productive pattern of derivation. This is a colonial period Chontal language, Akalan Chontal. For some reason, the surviving documents of that language are very similar in rhetoric, in spirit, and in vocabulary to classic period narratives. So here, for example, we have Chamel Uchelen. He dies, but it's actually with the verb to do. He did his dying. Uchelen gobernar. He did governing. Or with the verb to begin. Kahi utalel. He came, but actually began his coming. Yeah, so it's like you combine two verbs and you seem to get something else. O kahisha bi u katabal already began his asking, his questioning. Or kol numikon, I want to pass. Kol abi ubin, he wants to hear. Or ak upanla upalela pishan, you all want that your souls leave. So but that's kind of, that makes sense, to want to do something. That's not so far. But then you have verbs of motion, which is closer to that yita huli. So you have otiu mole, he came to recover it. I mean, we can kind of say that in English too, right? Otita tektelob, they came to stay. Also, something that would make sense in English. Or with to come in order to taliya ilkel, they came so that it would be seen. So ilkel is to be seen, or in middle voice. Utaski ya chamkel, they were sent so that it would be taken. So chamikel. Tali yupi, it happened that he heard. Literally, it came, or he came to hear. Tali chami, it happened that he died. So these combinations are very productive in colonial period texts, at least, and so and in Turkey today as well, with verbs of motion especially. So this is something that is just happening. Now we've seen that relational noun upat, and it's important that it most often does not refer to space, but rather to time. So behind means after. But it is often tied to this notion of personified time. It's like time has a body, like years. Like in this case, you have hunahau hab, the year hunahau. So the year is like a person who comes, governs, and then leaves. So when you say after that year, you literally mean behind that year. Like that year went away and you're staying behind his back. So use of these nouns also implies certain ideas about time, like embodied time. So in this case, they say behind 12 ahau, and they're talking about the year 12 ahau as well, or the katun of 12 ahau. I haven't talked much about participles, and it's a confusing subject because in English, participles are also used, for example, to form passive voice of verbs. Like it is done. Done is a participle by itself, but it is also part of a verbal form, verbal morphology. But participles in Mayan language are basically standalone adjectives derived from verbs. And when you translate them into English, they sound awfully like, passive voice. And there are different kinds of participles. BLM, perfect participles, so something that is not a state, but more like a completed state of something. I may say, like, it looks like a burnt table to me. It's like burnt table would be a perfect participle, like it has already happened. Or I may say, well, it looks like a burning table to me. Obviously, it's still on fire. That will be the present participle. Now, when I say this table is burned or burnt, that means it's more like a passive voice, like somebody is actively burning it. Or when I say the table got burned, that's like a middle voice. Now in English, it's all burned, and it's basically the same grammatical form. So it's harder for us to distinguish between nuances of meaning, whether it's a passive voice or an anti-passive voice, a middle voice, or a present participle or a perfect participle. But for the Maya, sometimes it's very important to make this distinction, because these would be mostly adjectives, attributes of nouns, and they would not be in sort of active action statements, more like describing the state of something. Sometimes inside personal names and sometimes in sentences without a predicate or without like a verb predicate. So here's an example with present participles. So the verb is til, to ignite, and hoch, to drill. And actually both verbs relate to fire because of course you ignite fire in traditional America by drilling, because that's what fire making tool looks like, right? It's a stick. Sometimes you move it by hand. Sometimes you have like a little bowl looking device that enables you to rotate it faster, and the friction creates the fire. And so here you have tilil ukach. His fire is ignited. And this is not a passive voice. If I wanted to say ignited as in passive voice, it would have been very different. I would have written this as til. I would infix h into til, so it would be tihel, and then I would add the suffix ach, so tihelach. That would have been a passive voice. But here it's just a state. In the same way, the second sentence says, hochol ach. The fire is drilled. Same thing. If I wanted to say like a passive voice, that would have been hochach. It's interesting that all of these examples, they come from one particular type of sentences when they describe a fire ritual cycle of Maya fire gods. So it's a kind of calendar cycle. And that may be the reason why they want to say participles, like today is the day when this particular god has his fire drilled. Like it's a state of things on that day. So it's not about one act. It's just happening out there. Like reporting weather. And that may be the reason why it's always participles and never verbs. Or for the most part. And it's interesting, the scribes, they try to be creative. Here they say, hatal ukach. His fire is stricken. Because that's another way of making fire with flintstone. So you strike a fire. But the idea is the same. It's not about a single act. It's what happens on that day in general. So a participle. And then tapal ukach. His fire is extinguished. Apparently, can also happen. But they refer precisely to the same event. Certain gods are apparently in charge of fire on certain days of that ritual cycle. So on that day, they will always ignite it in different ways, and they always extinguish it in different ways. Doesn't really matter. Another common participle is tzagbul. And you may remember, tzak is a very curious verb. It has a positional significance, like to occupy a certain place. It also has a transitive significance, to put things together. And then the positional verb can be transitivized with a bu suffix, like when you want to put something in a sequence. And from that, you derive a participle that means someone who succeeds, or succeeding, successor. So it's not an agentive noun, but we usually translate it as successor because it makes more sense contextually. And so here you have u lahun tzak ka buli. U lahun tzak bul, his 10th successor. And then the founder of the dynasty, Knityashkmo. So the 10th successor of Knityashkmo. So this is a common royal title. And X amount of generations after the founder of the dynasty. This is an unusual reference to a successor of a line of provincial rulers. It says, Washak Lahun 8 Tz'a Buli Washak Lahun Tz'agbul Sahal. The 18th successor of Sahal, suggesting that the person is the 18th in the line of provincial governors. Like his family had it for 18 generations. And pretty amazing. I'm sure he was also very proud of it, therefore cited it. It's like provincial governor to the bone. His dad and his granddad and his great-great-great-great-granddad, they're all provincial governors forever. Perfect participles are rare, perhaps because it's not much of a context for us to actually mention it. because they're kind of in this awkward position. They're more verbal because it's like after the fact. So we see them in names, like a wheel has been shaken. Literally, the shaken wheel, of course. Not even has been shaking, the shaken wheel, like the burnt table. So yuk, you may remember, is one of those effective verbs, but as an effective verb, it's intransitive, like to shake violently, to earthquake. But as a non-effective, it just general shake. It can be active voice, and then you can derive a passive, which would be yuhkach, was shaken. But here it's a participle, yukbil, the shaken one. So that person's name is Kawil, the shaken one. I don't know what it's supposed to mean, how you can shake a Kawil, but it is what it is. And here you have Agbil, probably the burned. Unfortunately, what is burnt is unclear. It's a building, a ball court. So the ball court is burnt. Some people argue that here we actually have an overlap with the passive of Yucatec Mayan language. Some confusion there. Now, the bil is a common suffix of perfect participles. Another common suffix is m in Shorty today, and in many Cholan languages, it's a very productive suffix of perfect participles. We don't have a lot of examples, but there's one name mentioned on a couple of monuments at the site of Piedras Negras Pomona. It's like a captive, and his name is Kesem Tok, the sharpened flint, or like the sharpened knife, or he who has the sharpened knife, or as my colleague Mark Zender, who discusses these names in an article on the decipherment of the meh syllable, Mr. Sharpened Knife. That was another way of translating it. So Mr. Sharpened Knife, his name is recorded several times, and always Keseme. And there's no other way or other plausible way to analyze the name. Ke as a prefix with sem doesn't make a lot of sense. Kes followed by m can only be this participle. So Mark R. Zender argues that this is the likeliest explanation. Of course, we have so many examples of perfect participles with the m suffix in a present-day Cholan language. Kind of makes sense. So why we don't see more of those? Well, for the same reason we don't see a lot of BL participles. It's just general unlikelihood of seeing them in the text, which deal mostly with events. And it's interesting that both Yugbil Kawil and SM Talk, they are in personal names, like burnt, sharpened. So that seems to be the context in which those things appear. And finally, particles. We talk more about particles, of course. The E, then, those that we see with dates, perhaps as numeral classifies hen and heo, days past, lot, the duration of something, and then finally the subject of today, the ich and the he, since, ago, that deictic, clitic, that refers to time, but also relationships in sentences, in complex sentences. You may remember this text about the red flintstone turtle death and how he danced with the king. So here lot is used very clearly as duration. So our red flintstone turtle death is dancing Sakyakna. He is accompanied by Yita Yonal Ach, holy or divine Yokib Lord, in 3 years. So in 3 years here means that he had been the king for 3 years, as when he danced with red flintstone turtle death. So we could translate it as in the 3rd year of his reign, or who had been king for 3 years, or who had been out there for 3 years. I really like this statement. It's on a palace tablet at Palenque, and it describes the reign and death of the king Kanbalam. So it says, Utaka his assembled thing, his time. And it says 15 without a suffix, probably heolat. And then wak winiklat, 6 months duration. Washaklahun hablat, 18 years duration. And then it says kalaute. Kal means to splinter. Te means wood. Wood splintered in antipassive, like activity. So the duration, so he's wood splintered for the duration of 18 years, 6 months, and 15 days. I ochbihich. And then he entered the road. He died. So they describe basically royal activity as wood splintering. I don't know if you remember, we talked about it. Maya kings are maize gods, and we have this trope, this story of the maize god arriving to a particular place as kalomte, wood splinterer. And sometimes the texts say, tabai, he ascends, and describe the arrival of the maize god to a particular place, say tikal, mutul. But sometimes they describe the maize god as kalaute, wood splintering. And the idea is perhaps that the maize god is clearing the wilderness, the forest. And it may seem like a strange verb to describe how you cut wood, but we're talking about very large trees. And you're not cutting them with a chainsaw or a metal saw in general. You're cutting them with a stone axe, ideally with a jade axe, like a hard jade axe. So the action itself, you're more like breaking the wood into bits. And imagine trying to break a wood that is like 5 feet wide. I've seen trees like that. So that is seen as a kind of foundational labor investment, like something that has to be done only once, and it's the hardest thing to do. So we may not necessarily think of Maya kings as members of the woodmen of the world who have these nice, tombstones in local cemeteries. But a Maya person would have understood. They would say, oh, I see, that's a Kalomte's grave, and there's another Kalomte's grave. Because there's this idea that the king, probably not like he starts every morning by grabbing his like jade axe and hanging out in the woods and chopping them, but symbolically he does. That's what he does. He extends the domain of people, the domain of agricultural fields, and we kind of some Amayanists lament that we don't have enough agricultural metaphors and themes in Maya text, but perhaps we're just not good at spotting them. So here they literally describe the toil of kingship as wood chopping. So 18 years of wood chopping, and then he died. So he fulfilled his goal, his mission as a king. He extended the milpa, as we would say today. He did milpa for 18 years. He cleared milpa for 18 years, then he passed away. So that's lat. So that's the notion of duration. The E-clitic is trickier because it can refer to all kinds of things, a previously reported event or an early event, and additional information, something that clarifies the previous clause, or clarifying the agent who is responsible, or location, or sometimes like a meta-discourse, who said what, like clarifying where the source of the information is. So all of these possibilities are there when we use the E-clitic. Now, once again, we have to rely on present-day Mayan languages as a source of analogy because there's so few long texts, so few literature-like texts from the classic period. So we have to imagine what it is like by looking at colonial period sources. And once again, Akalan Chuntala is a great example of how these sentences with clitic work. So in this case, Jaime Castilla Winicob, those Spanish people, Yithok Padre Obi, with the priests, Ahuli Uchukikab, came and captured the land. So this is all in the completive and no clitic, because they just came and captured. So all done. Or here we have Yuval ut ane ut an Dios, they speak the word of God. Now here, there's no completive because they still speak, like that's what they do in general. They haven't finished speaking, right? They always speak the word of God. I'm talking about priests. Now we have completive with clitic. Kahi yit hogbel pashpolnacha akat anihi. They began joining with pashpolnacha, the ruler, as I have already mentioned. So this akata ich, that ich part here indicates I have already mentioned that. So in this case, I'm referring to something that I already discussed, and therefore I add clitic to the verb to speak. Or hal shach hiliop chumanyop yata chan potom akat anihi. For a long time, then they rested and they sat around in Champoton, as I have already said. Same idea, right? Something that has already mentioned. Or in this case, we have ihi with ish, like already. Tali hish uyupi padre fray Diego de Bejar ut an winikobi. After it already happened, or came about literally, because tali means to arrive. Father Diego de Bejar listened to the words of the people. Tali hishme fray Diego Pesquera tu chalup. Already after it came to pass, or already after Fray Diego Pesquerale had already come for the second time to Chalup in his second time. So same idea, right? It has already happened. Or specific reference to an early event, like here. Then he entered Chihuahua. He proceeded by way of Usul Haban, where I passed by Numihi. Where I passed by Numon. Then after he had passed by, presumably me, Numihi. So in the second time, because you refer to the previous passing by, you need the clitic. You don't need it the first time, Numon, I passed by. Or in this case, it's interpreted as supplementary information. So this king, Pashbol Nacha, whom I have already mentioned, we've seen that already, Akatanihi, has three sons. One of them was named Pachimala Hish. His son named was Don Luis Pashua. This one fled. It's like not already fled, but it's like additional information. And by the way, it's the one who fled. So let's say he. And distant past, of course, can also be provided with clitic. But you kind of see the pattern here. The pattern is that there is something that is connected to another part of the narrative. And that connection can be context, like something that I've mentioned, or it could be additional information or an earlier event. And so the whole idea of clitic, if you see a clitic, there must be another part of the narrative that has no clitic, like that the clitic ties to. So distant past, something that has already happened. Now, looking at classic period examples, this is one of my favorite ones. You've seen parts of it before. This is a text on a set of plates from body armor. So the king of Piedras Negras who went to battle in his body armor. We have depictions of that. That's how it looked. And fragments which were recovered from his tomb. And that armor contained his wife's birthdays and marriage dates. Because I guess every time he was banged on the head, he was probably like, do I still remember? Ishwini Kabaha. Oh gosh, okay, I'm still okay. Still remember her birthday. Marriage dates. Okay, I'm good. So unusual, right? Very unusual for, but tells us something about Maya kings, right? And their family life. And so it's a kind of parallel record to what we see on monuments. For example, in your take-home assignments, we looked at Lady Winnie Kabahau, her marriage record, and some of it matches the story, and some of it seems to be different, which is also interesting. This is kind of more internal, more personal perspective what was going on. Some of these are now in the UPenn Museum in Philadelphia. And so the first one gives us pretty much the same narrative we see on the monument. On the day 5 Kib, day 10 of the month of Yashkin, is born Siyach, Lady Namanahau, Lady Winikabahau. So that is all fine. Then we see the E-clitic, 15 days and 9 months with the he, so past. So we know that the next event is going to be later in time. And 12 years passed, see he, since she was born, right? Since she became gift. So that's E-clitic. And see he obviously relates to the previous statement. That has no E-clitic, just has siyach, right? So that's a great example of how E-clitic is used. Then you have a particle E, then, pasach, at dawn, on the day 9 Chuen, 9 Uniu, machkach, she is enclosed, and then Lady Namanahau. That part is, once again, something we see on the monuments. And then you have ukab he, as he had ordered, literally as was his order. This is like a perfective gerund-like form, or ordering, as was his ordering. And then itzam kanak, chan win kabahau, kuhulio kibahau, as was his ordering, itzam kanak, the Lord of 4 20-year cycles. We know he was close to his death, actually, dying. He died in a few days later. The divine Yorkib Lord. So here, once again, clearly says that ordering refers to Mahkah. Right? She was enclosed, the king had ordered it. But the text doesn't stop there. It actually says that then the lady was presented. And this is something we see on monuments. On the day 14, Uniu, or Ankin in the Yucatec pronunciation of that month, Nawach. And in the story on monuments, we see Lady Winikabahau, Lady Namanahau is Nawach, becomes presentation, is presented, Yichnal, the relational noun, in front of her husband, Inichonal Ak. Here, though, the story is different. It's Nawach, Yichnal, Ishach Bikil, presumably the king's mother. So on monuments, the marriage is about presenting the bride to the husband by the husband's father's orders. On the shells, it's the mother actually who's in charge of everything, which is interesting. So different perceptions, different interpretation of what is actually going on. So according to the shells, it's the king's mom who was in charge. And you can decide which interpretation you want to trust. The official record on the monument of what the king was carrying on his body armor. And then you have a distance number, a very long distance number. It says 0 days, 4 months, or perhaps 4 days and 0 months, 3 years, all with E-clitic. So taking us forward in time, and 2 years without any E-clitic, perhaps just omitted. And then Ipasach, then at dawn, again. On the day 1 Kaban, it's interesting that all the marriage events happen on the day Kaban. Even today, Maya think of Kaban as a good day. It's the Earth Day. It's good for mountaintop rituals, for example. So kind of wonder if they thought that it was a good day to get married, like an auspicious day, like a strong foundation. If you want to build a house, for example. Same idea. And then at the edge of the month of Yashkin, Nawach was presented. So we see a second marriage event. So the king got married for the second time, 40 years later. And then you have the name of the bride, which is strange. It says, Yet Abail Ishmatwil Ahau. The namesake of Lady of Matwil. And it's a problem when people are just, when we think about names, right, we always assume that people would be known by their name. But apparently there was someone who was very famous and was Lady of Matwil. And this person was her namesake. And it was somehow more important to say that she was that person's namesake than to actually give us that name. So we don't know actually what the name of the second spouse was, because we don't know which Lady of Matwil they're talking about. So it's a kind of fascinating example of like how out of context we are. It's like somebody saying, well, the namesake of the Grammy winner of that year. Like we all know, right? Or no, maybe don't. But it's that case.
You think it might be a space restriction because the small.
That's too, but they really wanted to say about the namesake. Somehow it was important. And then the text actually continues, says, ukabich, or ukabhi, as in this case, she had overseen that, or as she had ordered, Lady Namana how. So we know that the second marriage was ordered by the king's first wife. So that is the strongest indicator that we have, that the female side of the household was actually arranging all the marriages. So the king's mother presumably arranged his first marriage, and then his senior wife took over as the head of the household and arranged the second marriage. And then the text says Yichdal, and then we have Choch or Koch Yonalach. That's the extended version of the name of the king. He was also known as the Puma, the mountain lion. That was his second common name. Yokib Lord, four Katun Lord. So he is now in his fourth Katun of life, and now he's getting married for the second time. But apparently it's not his will. It's his first wife who wants him to get married. We don't know why. To produce another offspring, to seal an important deal between the houses. But it's fascinating because it basically tells us a different perspective. That women of the royal household are in charge of marriages and supervising marriages, and they have apparently some kind of seniority amongst them. So it's the mother of the king. When she passes away, it becomes his senior wife, and presumably she's in charge of all the royal household marriages. And the story seems to be different from what the public monuments are telling us. Not because any of them are lying, they're just different perspectives of what is going on. And it's interesting that Lady of Bikil is not mentioned at all in monuments, even though she was in charge. Was it because they didn't want to mention her, or was it because they were not allowed to mention her? It was not okay to discuss her. She was not to be named because she was so powerful and important. Like some kind of sacred center of the kingdom that was not supposed to be exposed by public naming, only on personal possessions of the king. So all kinds of interesting ideas about how my marriages work, but ultimately it's a great example of using clitics, describing sequential events and who is in charge of what. Here's another great example. This time it's the kings doing things and it's warfare. This is a text that looks very weird to us, but makes total sense to a Maya person. So it's about a warfare, and it starts with a clitic, so chukhi. So we can start translating the text as since or as on the day for men, the day 3 of the month of Mak, had been captured. And then an unfortunate Etzwell Antokluk, Lord of Tsikalnach, by the weapons of the sacrificial priests. Unfortunately, we still don't know how to read the name of that Yashchalan king. We call him Trophy-head Jaguar because the name of the king consists of the logogram for jaguar and a logogram that looks like a skull suspended on a knot. Here they are conflated. So that suspended skull looks like a trophy head. So we call him Trophy head, but we actually don't know what the logogram signifies. And then there's a count of time, utzakach, and it's a long period of years, months, days, and 20s of years. So basically 151 years later, then it happens on the day 5 Hish, day 17 of the month of Unil, is captured, Ak Anusich, Lord of Buktun, by weapons of the Fokatun Lord, sacrificial priest, the guardian of Arsak, Itzam Kokach Balam, a divine Lord of Pachan. So this kind of, it looks awkward, strange from our point of view, because the first event kind of qualifies the second. That's why the clitic is there. As that person got captured 151 years ago, so now is this person captured. They want to tell us something. The two events are related somehow. Fortunately, there is a second text about the same event from a different monument that clarifies it, or its perception from a local point of view. It's on a lintel, and we have the same date, 5 Hish, is captured, Ak Anusich, literally he of the yellow vulture. those local names, they like animals in Western Maya lowlands. The captive, the bone of Itzam Kokak Bahlam, the captor, the guardian of Aksak, divine Pachan Lord. And then you have Ut Agbu, or Ut Agbul, or Ut Agbu, like he replaces or he succeeds, like a transitive verb. He succeeds Utok, Upakal, the flint and the shield of Trophyhead Jaguar. And then you have E-clitic, Uchuki, and then the beginning of the name of that guy up there. That's well Antok look. So on that day, the unfortunate yellow vulture was captured. He is the captive of Itzam Kokak Bahlam. That Itzam Kokak Bahlam succeeds the weapons of his predecessor. Since that predecessor captured that other guy, as well, Antok Luk. So the assumption is because of these two captures, and because of the second capture, Itzam Kokak Bahlam is now a worthy successor of his distant ancestor. He matched his record. We don't know why the capturing of that dude was so important, but apparently it now raised the profile. He's a worthy replacement of his ancestor. Hall of Fame of some sort, just added another little trophy, presumably made from the yellow vulture. They probably had like, a little bone here and there, a tag. So here E-clitic is used twice, right? And slightly differently, but the idea is that these things are related. E-clitic may also be used to indicate events which happened in distant time, very much like in the Kalan Chantal narratives. And this is an interesting text. It also looks a little strange, but as we're going to look at it, it's not so different from our way of thinking about history. So this is a deep time event. This is the creation event, the last major creation. And for that creation on the day 13 Ahau, day 18 of the month of Hulolo, Kumku, in Yucatec, Tzachbach is planted, Yash Tit Mihi Sak Sak Ik Ushlahuna Hautun. That's the name of the monument that is planted. So the 13 Ahau stone, that's obviously the date. And the monument is precious, sheet, growing, soul, white, wind, 13 Ahau stone. So the name of that thing. And it is being ordered by 4 priests. We're talking about deities in this case, who basically summon reality into existence. Remember those 4 hero twins who do bloodletting in different kinds of places in the water, on land. This is what they're talking about, the establishment of the world. But the text also doesn't stop there. It continues. It says, as it was completed, and then there is another period of time, an enormous period of time. And then it says, it happened on that day, 13 Ahau, day 18 of the month of Sak, just a few million years ago. And it was overseen by this god, literally pitch blackness place god. And then it happened in the waterfall place. And also, by the way, as was completed this period of time, also a few million years ago, these are so-called extended long count periods. We'll talk more about it when we discuss Maya time. Also on the day 13 Ahau, but day 13 of the month of Ikat. And that was ordered by the god named Mishnal, and it happened at the green or precious deer mountain. Now, you kind of wonder, like, what the hell is going on? But remember, to the Maya, the time itself is cyclical. So what they're telling us is, this happened on the day 13 Ahau. And by the way, another major period of time was also completed on the same day 13 Ahau, many million years ago, by that god. And also, by the way, also on the day 13 Nahal, and yet another major time period was also completed, but by a different god in a different place. So what you're seeing is something like my way of saying, on this day in history, because from a certain point of view, 13 Nahal is always 13 Nahal. Like things which happened on 13 Nahal, they shall always happen on 13 Nahal. Very much like Battlestar Galactica, right? All of these things happened before and will happen again. That's what Maya think about time, more like our notion of a day in history. They kind of give you a reference, not because they want to inform you necessarily. They assume that you already know. They just want you to describe, wants you to appreciate the fact that the current creation is one of many great gods of the past, already completed even larger periods of time. So our current incidence or instance of existence is just a speck in this wheel of never-ending cycles. So it's a kind of my way of telling us, don't worry, it doesn't matter much anyway. Here's another text, which is interesting how strategically it uses clitics. So it starts with Abai Wintana, he ascends at Wintana. Something, I'm not sure how to read this part, so I'm going to skip it. Yashnu Nahin, so this is the new king of Tikal. He ascends to a place called Wintana. We know it's a temple at the great Mexican city of Teotihuacan. So this is some kind of major political change. On the day 8 men, presumably he ascends at Wintana on the day 8 men. Ukabach, it is the commanding of. It's interesting, there's no clitic here. So it's not that he ascends by command, that everything is the commanding of. So no clitic here, it's kind of sequential. Kalomte, on the day 10 Kaban, another Kaban day. Those Kaban days are good for important things. On the day 10 Kaban, on the day 10 of the month of Yashkin, he is in kingship, the maternal grandson of divine Kukul Lord. We know that Yashnuhin was the son of Teotihuacan ruler. His connection to Tikal, to Kukul, the place of many squirrels, was through his mother. So it's very important to mention that he is related to the local Tikal dynasty through his mother. So he's the maternal grandson of the divine Maya ruler. And then Yashnuhin, he takes 28 provinces, presumably the totality of Maya lowlands. And then the text says, Upat, probably, Kalomte. He's after the Kalomte. Like, he wasn't the one who took it. The guy who conquered Maya lowlands took it, and he's just doing it after. And then Ukabach, once again, he is commanded by, or he is the commanding of Shiak. So once again, no clitic here. It all goes sequentially. And then the only clitic in the text, Uhti Wintana. It all happened in Wintana. So apparently all of these things, they still happen in Mexico. All of these decisions, takings, comings and goings, taking of 28 provinces. Yashnunahin is not even in Tikal yet. That seems to be the idea. And so clitic here, it kind of nails it for us. All of those things, they're just happening over there in a foreign land.